Welcome back to Chocolate and Spice, Two Brown Women Talk. I'm Neha.
Hey, and I'm Nidhi. Today we are diving into a topic that affects 50% of women according to recent research, and it hits even deeper for those of us raised in a culture where being good means never saying no. And just on that note, please don't forget to like this video. If you enjoy it, we have put in a lot of effort and shared a lot from our heart.
Yeah, and the more you engage and comment, the more people can learn about this very important topic that so many of us worry about, and that's people pleasing. That invisible weight of always being the one who says yes, who keeps the peace, who puts everyone else's comfort before our own boundaries. And here's the thing, between the two of us, this conversation is going to be interesting because I'm a recovering people pleaser, while Nidhi somehow escaped the conditioning entirely.
We are exploring where this comes from and how it shows up differently in South Asian families where log kya kahenge, which means what will people say rules our decision, and the hidden cost of always being the good daughter. Plus, we'll tackle the big question: is people pleasing always harmful, or is there a difference between kindness and people pleasing? All right, I'm going to ask you some of the questions because we have established that you are the people pleaser. So, when did you first realize this was a pattern, not just being nice?
I realized it actually very recently. And I will credit a lot of that, of my understanding and my growing up in this area to social media, because I started following a lot of these really great, uh, influencers who had an understanding of what is the right thing to do with mental health. And I really started listening to them, and they would describe these scenarios. And then it would occur to me that I lived that scenario and I've been living those scenarios for a while. And that was the moment of light bulb for me, because all along I thought like that's how you're supposed to behave. I never thought of it being nice. I was like, that's how everyone should behave. And if they're not behaving, then that's a problem. And I never recognized that I was hurting myself. So to me, I will say like maybe around like in my early 40s, like I'm 44 right now. I would say late 30s to early 40s is when it really hit me that this is, first of all, not who I am, that this is a pattern that I have forced myself to believe in. And I'm just following it because I didn't think of any other choice.
Better late than never, right? Uh, and what is the most costly yes you've ever given in terms of your own well being?
Well, it's going to be hard to define one single instance, but I will say that anytime I have not prioritized my inner self-talk, or especially related to health, mental health as well as physical, that's when I have suffered the most. And when I agreed to let somebody else ask something from me, but and I know I shouldn't say yes to it, but I say yes to it, and my mental health suffers. So again, I cannot go deeper into a specific scenario, but there have been so many, to be honest.
Okay, that's fair. And how does it feel physically in your body when you want to say no, but you don't, or you're not able to?
Well, it really feels terrible. But you know what? I did not recognize that until I realized what I'm doing, right? Like I can actually trace back to when this pattern started to hitting puberty, because when you and I were discussing about this topic and we wanted to have a podcast on this topic, that's when I actually started thinking back to when did I actually start this. Like literally yesterday night is when I started thinking about when did this start, because I now recognize it's a pattern, and therefore I'm able to contain it. And I realized I was actually a person who would speak their mind. I've always been quiet, so I'd either not speak, but when I'd speak my mind. And somewhere along puberty, I realized that is not the way to be validated and to be loved, or to be praised. And so the better way of doing it is if I really said what others wanted to hear and said a lot of yes. So between being very quiet, and I can really pinpoint the moments as well. It's like, I would often be kind of almost rude. Now it occurs to me that I was not even being rude. I was just speaking my mind in my childhood. But and then I'd get scolded by mommy or papa, and they were doing the right thing. But to me, I internalized it as thinking, oh, but if I didn't say it that way, then I wouldn't get scolded, which means I'd be a nice girl, I'd be more loved. And already by the time puberty hit, I started getting good grades. And so I just put two and two together. And I was like, okay, I'm obviously a nice person. I'm loved in school. And if I'm always quiet and if I always do what's asked of me, then I'd be even more praised. And so I think that's how my mindset sort of shifted, because internally I would get upset, and that would show up as me not talking at all, even talking even less than I would have. And then over time, of course, like over decades, it just become a pattern. But I lost my ability to understand how to say no, and lost like that muscle. You need a muscle to be able to speak up and speak up for yourself. And I think there are years over years where we've done the bullying episode as well, right? Like people have been unkind to me, and it never occurred to me to, counter that with something that I truly believed in. I just absorbed it, and it really works on your psyche negatively over time. So I know your question was, how does it physically show up on my body? And for the longest time, it was such a part of my nature that I don't think I even recognized it was hurting me in any way. It would be after the fact when I'd said yes to something and then I suffered on account of it. And then I was like, oh man, I shouldn't have said yes to it. But I never changed my behavior. So now it's different. Now that I understand myself and I understand what I want to do, if I want to say no to something, and if I don't say no, I'm going to be so mad. Like I will figure a way out to say no ultimately, but it does take learning and conditioning.
And in our childhood, I do remember you do used to get very quiet, and almost in my mind, when we were very young, you used to seem angry and bitter because maybe you didn't understand how to say no. And now that we are reflecting back in retrospect, I think it might be one of your ways of physically showing that you wanted to say no so bad, but you just couldn't bring yourself to say no.
Totally. I was just trying to be this perfect, nice, smiling, pleasant kid. I think it backfired spectacularly because nobody thought I was necessarily that. And in my mind, I kept like sabotaging my own mental health. All right, Nidhi. So my next question is actually for you. What do you think protected you from this kind of conditioning?
Honestly, I think that is how I'm just wired. I've always been this extrovert, and I genuinely care about what makes me happy. Even as a kid, when our parents said no to me, it was always not yet. I think we covered that in our first episode. It was always like that is not a confirmation when they say no, it's just a suggestion. And I think that really protected me from, what I think it really protected me was this inner confidence that my needs matter just as much as anybody else's need. And I never saw self prioritization as a rebellion. It was just the way of my life, just common sense. And I learned early on that you can still love and respect your family and your community without letting anybody dictate your decision. Plus, in my job, my everyday job, my superpower is prioritization. So I kind of take that into my real life too. And if something doesn't serve my goal or happiness, it's just not for me.
That's amazing. Have you ever been called selfish or difficult for having boundaries?
Oh my God, absolutely. I've not only been called like selfish or difficult, I've been called disobedient, I've been called too much, more times than I can actually count, especially by family or people who expect women to just go along quietly. But I've realized that selfish is often the code word or another way of saying that you did not do what I asked you to do. And setting boundaries makes some people uncomfortable, especially in our culture where women, especially, are expected to be endlessly accommodating. My God, I've seen that so much around me, but I rather be called difficult than live with resentment or reject. I see this as being honest and not rude. And honestly, the people who truly care about you, who understand you, they will understand like this aspect of my life and why I said no. And they shouldn't be up even for a discussion.
That's amazing. I mean, I cannot even imagine, because I know I know you've been called that often, and you just went along with it. And for me, that would have been the end of the world. Like if somebody called me difficult or disobedient, that would be like, what am I even doing with my life? Nobody loves me, right? So you're right. Like we are definitely wired differently, but also you made sure you conditioned yourself appropriately and put yourself first, which is very, very important. And when I know you've seen me struggling with this. What advice would you give me?
Yeah, I have seen you wrestle with this aspect of people pleasing way too many times. And the only thing I always tell you, I remind you that your needs are not a burden. You are allowed to disappoint people. I try to share my perspective with you, and obviously, I respect that you are an adult and you'll make your own decision. But sometimes just hearing somebody else's point of view gives you like a insight into the unseen world, and it is okay to put yourself first. So I mean, you already know this, but I often tell you that you don't owe anybody your peace of mind, not even your family. You are not responsible for managing other people's emotions. And honestly, I just remind you that boundaries are not walls, they are just doors, and you just let the right people in and keep resentment away. So I hope that helps whenever I tell you my point of view. But yeah, that is
Oh
what
my
I try.
gosh. I can feel it. I sometimes start feeling sick, and your gut, how it like things change in your gut, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. And then I call you. I'm like, she's gonna tell me the right thing. She's just gonna tell me what I want to hear, and then hopefully I'll do the right thing. So yeah, thanks for sharing your advice.
Let's try to get into a different topic, which is the cultural layer. So, a question for you. How does being a good daughter translate into people pleasing into adulthood?
I think very, very significantly. And you already touched upon the cultural aspect of, how things are, especially in South Asia, where women have a certain role to play in the society. And the role is one of making sure family works smoothly, relationships work smoothly. And that is true for all. Like, while I am that, I have seen our mom do that, and our grandmothers, and our aunts. Just about everybody will be that person who sort of placates everybody, right? And at the cost of their own happiness. So I feel like for me, it went the same way when we were young. And my idea of being a good daughter was doing the right things at the right time. Of course, in terms of education, I had to get good grades. I had to make sure I get into engineering or something, which was considered the right career option. And to your point, yes, I took all the heat, and I did it. But I also did it because I wouldn't like blame anybody for it. Obviously, it turned out really well for myself, and it's something that I was into. I really did like to. I did like maths. I did like physics. So it was not a big stretch for me to actually want to study. Where I think I fumbled was in how I interacted. And I feel like my social life suffered exceedingly because I just didn't know the right response, particularly to elders, right? So and now that I think back to my life, my younger life, even to my peers, I just wouldn't talk because I just didn't want to say something wrong and then lose that friendship or lose that respect. And so the way that translated was I would mostly be very quiet, and that doesn't help because you have to learn to communicate, because that really helps you in your future. I will say, for most of my all the way up to high school, my thinking about being a good daughter was really always listen, do the right thing, be polite, be smiley, and wear the right things, and then by the time I entered college, I still carried along that, like, so, all my college years, I was this person who was considered like super quiet, who wouldn't budge an inch from what she's expected to do. Only when I got my first job, that I don't know, that's when I kind of realized, oh, wait, people don't know me here, and there's not a lot of expectation. I'm earning my own thing, and maybe I can finally start talking about things the way I want to. And that's when I sort of moved out of like this being a good daughter phase, because there was nobody to really look at me and say, hey, you're not doing the right thing. And so it went from there. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered the South Asian families portion, that being a good daughter isn't just about being obedient. It is the whole survival strategy that gets programmed into us from day one. And the crazy part is, I think I dodged that bullet because you were already doing everything that was needed. You were playing that role so perfectly. You were soothing all the family conflicts and getting good grades in school, making everybody proud, never arguing back. Meanwhile, I was over here just being my loud and stubborn self. And honestly, I just think maybe the family just gave up on me. But I didn't have to play the perfect part because you did it so well. So kind of escape that part. On to the next question that I have for you is, how do concepts like respect for elders become weaponized against setting boundaries?
This is such a good question. And this is also, I think, a conditioning for South Asian families. Typically, like I think the South Asian society is very respectful of age, which is great, sure. But we should be respectful of everyone in general. And this is something I realized only when I came to the US. And it again took me a lot of thinking through, particularly as I go out to work and I meet a lot of people who are not South Asian. And that's when I realized I'm like, oh well, you know, you don't have to necessarily just respect and listen to and always obey if somebody older than you told you to do something. It has to come from a very different place. It has to come from a place of, wisdom, and it has to come from a place of experience, perhaps, and knowledge. And that doesn't mean you don't respect, but that does mean that you don't blindly follow somebody just because they're older than you. And this is like a serious conditioning, very hard to break, especially at this day and age. Like now you cannot suddenly go back and somebody elder is asking you to do something. It's really hard. I'm talking about India and South Asia. It's really hard to just say no to them, right? Because they don't expect it. You don't want to hurt them and you don't know what else to do. So I do say, I will say that I don't know if it's weaponization or not, but I will say that that is the crux of why, at least for me, I felt people pleasing became a big thing. Because anytime, especially I'd interact with older folks, I'd automatically think I have to be so respectful. And the way I show my respect is by always listening to them, always bowing, and always like agreeing with whatever they're saying, which in hindsight seems so silly. But I'm sure you had a different frame of mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very similar to what you said, and this is something I really had to unlearn and rethink over time. Like in a lot of South Asian families, the idea of respect, I feel, it just flows in one direction, from younger to older. It's deeply rooted in tradition, and while it comes from a place of love and cultural pride, it sometimes leaves very little room for individual autonomy. Growing up, questioning elders, whether it's about career path or relationship or even simple daily chores, was often seen as disrespect. That label carried a lot of weights and emotional pressure, especially for girls and women. At least that's what I think. And it becomes difficult to express your own needs without feeling that you are letting your family down. And as an adult, this can make setting boundaries really challenging. Like even wanting privacy, independence, a different way of living can be interpreted as turning your back towards your family. It's not always said outright, but there's always a subtle guilt that creeps in. You are forgetting your roots. You are being selfish. And I think we talked about it. I have been called difficult a lot of times for choosing a different path or, doing something that was not really very common or looked down upon. But I have come to believe that real respect should be mutual. I can deeply love and honor my family and my community while also making choices that are right for me. To me, honor and respect your elders is a valuable guidance, but it should never really be used to silence you.
I love that perspective. And I'm always constantly amazed by how thoughtful you are around it, because often people might think, oh, you're just being selfish and disrespectful and disobedient. But you have a thought process behind it. You have thought through what, real human dignity, regardless of anything else, any external factor, including age is, and you act accordingly. And so you have that independence of thought. For me, I feel like my conditioning came a lot from having dependency on whatever that cultural value held, right? And therefore I just followed along instead of really thinking for myself, like, do I agree with it? And it took me a while to really question some of my reactions and actions, and hopefully change myself.
Right. Let's move on to some real world impact questions. So, Dee, I have one for you. How does people pleasing show up at work, and what does it cost us professionally?
It cost us a lot. I will say this though, for me, while, like I said, like when I got my first job, that's when I kind of felt like I'm more free. And because I felt like I was not necessarily pushed by either the cultural significance or family or elders to behave a certain way. And I felt like I felt the most free when I was at work because I could show up as I wanted to. And I still, it took me a while to be honest. So I grew in my career based on how fearless I became. And initially, I used to be a little hesitant and I used to be more compliant. And I think particularly with, super senior leadership, right? Like you have this tendency of, oh my gosh, how am I going to speak up in front of super senior leadership and what should I always say? And I think that's independent of people pleasing. I think it's something that everybody at work kind of has to figure out. And I mean, I've been working for 20 years now, so I've kind of like figured out what's the right balance of how much you want to comply with something versus how much you want to speak up because you truly believe in. And so for me, I would suggest for those who are starting early in their career is always understand the values of the company you're at, always understand the culture of your company. That is important. But the way you can speak up and not necessarily go people pleasing as a way to grow is really know your thing. Like know your job well, gather enough knowledge about whatever it is you're working on, keep yourself up to date, keep learning, be proactive, don't be flaky, and you will not have to do people pleasing. People will really respect you, love you, and help you grow because you are exceedingly valuable to the company. So I will say, people pleasing typically doesn't work, especially as you go ahead in your career. Like at a point, people will figure out that you don't really know, especially if you don't really know your job and you're just people pleasing as a way to grow, people will figure it out over time. And so my suggestion is, yes, be respectful, be kind, but be fearless, especially if you know what you're doing, and speak up and show up. And that's the best way.
Yep. I totally agree with you. It's like speaking up, having your own opinion. I don't think there is anything wrong with it. And let me give you an example that kind of helps you understand where it comes into play at work. So when I was a fresh graduate at my first job, I was desperate to be liked. And I would agree to every request, agree to everything that was ever said in a meeting, even though I had my doubts. And at that time, one of my mentors, he pushed me aside and he said, Nidhi, you are brilliant. I feel like you always are saying things that I want to hear, not exactly what you think. So your voice matters, even if it is an unpopular one. And that statement kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized I was playing small to make other people feel more comfortable. And I made a pact with myself, speak up even if my voice shakes. It was certainly scary being a young graduate, but it changed everything. Suddenly I wasn't just the agreeable Nidhi, I became the person who sought out the real solution to the problems.
All right, Nidhi, a question for you. What's the difference between saying no with guilt versus saying no with confidence?
I just feel the difference is night and day. And honestly, it all comes down to where your self-validation comes from. When you say no with guilt, you're operating from a scarcity mindset. You feel like you've done something wrong just by setting a boundary. You end up saying something like, I'm sorry, but, or I wish I could do it, but unfortunately, you are over-explaining, over-apologizing, and basically seeking forgiveness for having spoken about your needs. But with confidence, I think it comes from self-worth. You know your time and energy, they both are limited, valuable resources. You are not rejecting that person, you are respecting your own capacity. And that's a huge shift. One thing that really helped me was a course that I did when I was doing my business degree. It was a 3 credit course. When we were doing it, I just felt like it was a waste of time. That course is called conflict resolution, but those are the learnings that I'm actually putting into practice now. And in that course, we learned real life scenarios, such as how do you say no to being a bridesmaid when it's not the right time for you? Or how do you say no to helping somebody over the weekend when you're burnt out? It was one of the first time I realized that saying no isn't rude, it's a skill. It's like something you build over time. And it can be done kindly and very clearly. Like a confidence no would sound like that doesn't work for me right now. No, I'm not available then. No over apologizing, no justification, just honestly delivered with respect, both for yourself and both for the other person. So it has been a learning for me, but I'll give a huge credit to that course that I did because we actually practiced with each other in that course, and that was like mind blowing for me. All right, I have a last question for you. How do you start small when you have never ever set boundaries before?
So hard. This is so hard. I'll give you a funny example. I was just thinking about it right now. It's like, when you're walking on the street and sometimes people hit each other by mistake. And then sometimes, you can tell people are not careful and they don't care for you and they'll hit you. And it has happened to me because I'm a very small person. I know it's not obvious, but like I'm a very small person, very easy to get hit and not get noticed. And you know what? Anytime somebody would hit me, I'd say sorry to them. Like that's my complete, not only lack of boundary, but like there is not only no boundary, I mean, people pleasing, it's at its worst. So going from there to figuring out how to say no in social situations and work has been a journey. Like I explained, at work somehow, because that's how I sort of maybe train myself. It's been relatively easier. Social life is still very hard for me. And how do you start small? I think the way you'd start small is exactly like you said, start kindly. A few mantras that I keep for myself, and again, this is something that I've just like developed in the past few years. One of the most important ones is be as fearless as you can in any given situation. That is, don't operate from the place of fear, and that can that can show itself in many different ways. And one way could be like, oh, I'm just going to say no and I'm going to just do whatever I wanted to. But then for me, the second sort of mantra or principle in my life is be kind. So yes, I want to be fearless. Yes, I want to do things that I believe is right for me without being fearful. But how do I do that while being kind? And those two guiding principles may seem at odds, but they are not. So for me, it is, I don't have to answer something very rudely, for example. Like even if I am, somebody has invited me and I'm not able to go, like that's one of the typical social scenarios. And I typically don't, I'm not a social person, which means most of the times I don't want to go. But, there are times when you want to go and there are times when you cannot go. And so in the cannot go situations, I will say, hey, I'm so sorry, I'm not able to attend this. I would have loved to attend. Maybe we catch up another time. And it's a very polite way of saying you don't have to necessarily explain yourself a lot. In the past, my previous version of kindness would have been over explaining myself. Like I will give all the rationale and reasons and like here's why and here. I realize first of all, the response is still the same, that I'm not going, and I don't know how much it helps by explaining myself. And sometimes you cannot explain yourself. And so no, while not a complete sentence, I know it's been said no is a complete sentence. I don't necessarily believe in it. It's okay to follow no with something else and say, hey, here's another possibility of when we could attend, or here's how I could help you. But that's my way of starting small, which is just being able to say no to a certain thing and giving a slight reason or giving some sort of helpful follow-up to that, and then going from there. I don't know, like I'm definitely a work in progress. So, I wouldn't say this is necessarily the right approach, but for me, it's really about being as fearless as I can and being as kind, and hopefully that works out.
That was a full circle conversation, and honestly, one I wish we had heard 10 to 15 years back.
Same. If you're listening and this episode stirred something in you, maybe you saw yourself in those quiet yeses or felt that knot in your stomach when you wanted to say no, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're just waking up to your own needs.
And it is certainly not selfish to do that. It's healthy, it's healing. So, whether you are deep into that people pleasing era or just beginning to take those small and brave boundaries, we see you and we are certainly cheering for you.
And if there is one thing I learned, it's that unlearning people pleasing isn't about becoming cold or disconnected. It's about being authentic, showing up with honesty instead of exhaustion. You can still be kind, you can still be generous, but now you get to include yourself in the equation. That's the shift. Let us know how this episode landed for you. And are you still working through people pleasing? What's one boundary you've set that felt life changing? Send us your stories at hello@chocolateandspicetalk.com or DM us on Instagram at chocolateandspicetalk. We love hearing from you.
And as always, if this episode made you reflect, laugh, cry, or rethink your next yes, please share it with a friend who might need it too. We'll see you next time in Chocolate and Spice to Brown Women Talk. Bye.
Bye.